In this video, we're going to be going over the extremely strange death of James Edward Gibson and likely homicide of this individual, which has been covered up and not reported by the DCMPD or by the news, the mainstream media. The interesting and very strange death of James Edward Gibson took place on Saturday, July 29th, 2017. And from the outside looking in, without any evidence to go on in any direction, as none has been officially released, the way it looks to me is that James Edward Gibson was shot in the back in Classic Motors, DC, and killed. Now, let's go through the case and what we actually do know and what evidence we're able to compile and who James Edward Gibson is connected to and possibly why no one has covered this. And the only notice of James Edward Gibson's death is in the Washington Post, which has hired people like John Podesta and allowed people like James Alefantis to write articles. Interestingly, only the Washington Post covered this guy's death, and at the end of the article it says, "In lieu of flowers, please consider a donation to the National Alliance on Mental Illness or the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention," trying to make it seem like James Edward Gibson committed suicide, yet we're going to go over why this likely is not the case, and it's likely he was murdered. One of the only sources of information we have on this is from @StreetRoachPics, which is Urban Info on Twitter, and he was on scene and actually took some images I'm going to show you and wrote up an article, I believe, on this as well, or is citing an article by bugnewsblog.com. So in this article being cited, it states, and this is written by a staff writer at bugnewsbloggy.blog.com, and it states, "If you've not heard, a police report was allegedly filed by someone from Jim Gibson's immediate family. This report led the DC Police Department to the same address as Classic Motors. Many people don't know that Jim Gibson's business shares the same address as the car dealership. There is one difference in the mailing address. The difference is Suite 101, which is interesting to me right off the bat because of the connection to George Orwell's Room 101. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just go type that in. Moving on in the article. The website link shows source, the full address. The business is in the basement location of the car dealership. A recent news story was released about a dead body found face down in the basement of a car dealership. Although I had a recent member in my family commit suicide, people are hoping this is not the case for the Gibson family." The article continues on, "If you are a poor working class person like many of us, you have not brushed elbows with Gibson. Gibson is one of the biggest custom home builders on the East Coast. With all the success in his life, the DMV community is awaiting the outcome of a police investigation with Classic Motors and Jim Gibson's business." This picture is from Custom Homes Online. So as the article stated, this individual, Jim Gibson, died in his business location, which is in the basement of a car dealership, face down from a bullet. What it sounds like to me, that's what's being reported. And it's interesting that they're claiming this is a suicide, which is what anyone connected to the Clintons is always, depicted as having done. But there's no evidence to suggest that this guy did commit suicide, and we'll get into why I think this was a homicide based on the evidence. One of the images that Urban Info took, which is important for us to understand what is taking place here, is this image of the back of the dealership while the police are there. As you can see in the foreground, right to the right of the sign up thing, you have yellow police tape around the entire outside of the business, and you had 10 officers there on duty, and you can see 3 of them here just in one back entrance. Now, do you generally have that type of response and setup for a suicide, or is this more the type of thing that you would see for a murder investigation? One of the most damning pieces of evidence to suggest that this is not just a suicide is the fact that the forensics van showed up. As you can see here, Crime Scene Sciences Division. This is their forensics experts for homicides. And when we called into the DC police, which I'll get into later, they told us, the public information officer told us that most of the time on suicides, the forensics experts would not be sent to the scene. Only in cases where they were questioning if it was a suicide or not, and in all homicide investigations, a forensics expert would be sent to the scene. So it is a very unlikely situation in a suicide to have these guys show up. However, if they think it was a homicide, then it's very likely these guys would show up, which makes it even more interesting that they were there. And they showed up with the wife of the owner of the car dealership. Another person who I noticed found this odd was George Webb, and George Webb said that DC MPD informed him that this van would only show up in the case of a homicide. Also, as reported by on-site eyewitness Urban Info, he states DC police have Classic Motors of Washington on lock. 7 police on scene, 5 men detained, one 40-something white female was brought inside. And once again, you can see that crime scene van is parked right out front. So here you can see Urban Info puts this up on his Twitter. He says, DC police all up Classic Motors, WTOP crime scene van just pulled up, wife of owner. So according to him, I believe he's saying that the wife of the owner was brought into Classic Motors by the police, and then you can see that the police have the place on lockdown and have detained 5 men, according to the only reporter that was on the scene. On Facebook, when I did some digging around to see if this guy really had passed away, what I was able to find was this post by Wayne Griffith. I bring the saddest of news for our group, the death of James Gibson on July 29th, which is the same day this incident occurred at the place where his business was partially listed. So here it says, I am without words of my own and attach the obituary from today's Washington Post. James Edward Gibson died unexpectedly on Saturday, July 29th. And nowhere in here does it say, how he died, what the cause was, and this is just the excerpt from the Washington Post I've already read to you. And once again, it notes that he went to Georgetown, and he went to American University and Wesley. All 3 of those are known recruiting colleges for the CIA. So also interestingly under this, Barb McCullough states, he was the picture of health at the reunion. Jim was so much help in getting his old Merchantville friends together to join us at the reunion. He also the wind behind our champagne toast. Many thanks, he will be missed by many. That's why attending reunions becomes more important as we get older. Glad I got to see him smiling and happy. So does that sound like the type of person that is in bad health and is about to commit suicide, or is, depressed and about to commit suicide? No, this guy was highly engaged in the DC community. He was building, giant mansions for DC elites. This guy just randomly dies at a car dealership face down from what it looks like. Interestingly, today, the DC police chief Newsham, the guy who #standswithComet, gave a press conference on recent DC homicides. And of course, what they did not mention was the death of James Edward Gibson, which I just showed you looks like it was a homicide. And all of these other homicides took place right around the same time, and they've been covering all of these other homicides, but not mentioning the James Edward Gibson death, and they haven't declared it as a suicide or homicide. It's just a death. They haven't said either way what took place that day, and they're not reporting on it, which makes me think that it's being covered up. In another article that came out recently on Fox 5, it talks about the 9 different homicides that have taken place in Washington, D.C., and very strangely, there is absolutely no mention of the death of James Edward Gibson, and there's still no mention that James Edward Gibson was murdered. It just says he died. It doesn't say it was suicide. It just says died unexpectedly. That's all we get. Guy just vanished from the face of the earth with no report. And of course, in the same exact time period, you can see the very next day, there was 9 shooting victims in 24 hours. So in the 24 hours that preceded after the death of James Edward Gibson, 9 other shootings happened in D.C. in a very short period of time. And that's extremely unusual, even for that area of D.C., which is crime-ridden. But that type of shooting spree is very unusual, and it dominated the local news, which is why absolutely no one pretty much covered the James Edward Gibson death, which is interesting because if someone like James Edward Gibson had died in, any other city, someone who built all types of big mansions and is one of the biggest builders in DC, you would think that would make the news, but it didn't because this shooting spree took place. And they never even mentioned him as part of that shooting spree, of course. Now, I would just like to talk about our contact with the DC police regarding this James Edward Gibson. We've called twice. The first time we spoke to the coroner office, and the coroner's office told us that on the police report, there were 0 men detained at this scene. And then a few days later, we call back and we get put through to the public information officer. The public information officer tells us that if people had been detained at the scene, that it wouldn't be on that report, and if it was a homicide, it would be on the homicide report if 5 people had been detained at the scene. Now, the question is, why did the coroner's office not tell us this very important detail about the people being detained that would have been on the homicide report and not off the report she was referencing? Why would she lie to us about this case? And when we look at DC police, as you can see from the article on the screen, they have a long and bad history of police corruption. 90 plus DC police officers arrested in 3 years, according to the Washington Examiner. And as we continue to document, and you can go through this article as well to look through some of the offenses these officers committed, such as choking one of their wives, the corruption and the lack of transparency, the fact that we can't get any FOIA requests through to the DC MPD, the fact that we've submitted hard evidence to them of a pedophile ring, the fact that they've made no arrests whatsoever, this just screams that they are involved with the cover-up. There couldn't be a better picture to describe what's taking place with the DC police than this one. Here you have Chief Newsham standing with a sign that says, "We stand with Comet," which is Comet Ping Pong, which has never been properly investigated by his police department, despite the fact that we've submitted hard evidence that Comet Ping Pong had child porn on its back end of its website. Okay? Never mind all the other circumstantial evidence that would 100% require an investigation, including the emails of John Podesta's own email account, that he doesn't even refuse that are his emails. He fully acknowledges those are his emails. So somehow on this violent weekend in DC, and here you can see the Fox 5 report, they did not add the homicide that took place at Classic Motors DC, or possibly inside Gibson Builders office, which is located in the basement of Classic Motors DC. And it just so happens on the same day that took place, James Edward Gibson unexpectedly died. So is there a homicide investigation going on? Can the police confirm to us what happened to James Edward Gibson? Can they confirm to us what happened at Classic Motors DC? No, they're unwilling to confirm any of these things because the DC Police Department is completely corrupt and run by people like Peter Newsham. So we can take a look at Classic Motors, and this is a view of the outside of the building. When you go on their website, you can see they have an inventory of some very high-end cars, as high as like $100,000 on some of them. And you can see inside of the front end of the shop there, they actually do have some pretty high-end cars, which you can find on their website. And it's just, an interesting little dumpy car dealership that has really high-end cars. One theory is that, there's some connection here to the Awans, and possibly this was a hit job done because maybe this car dealership sold them cars on a consignment, and when the Awans didn't pay them back for that, they went in and took out someone. That's just one theory I've heard about this, and I can't find any connection between the Awans and this dealership, but the Awans do have a history of that type of thing, and it's just one interesting theory that I am looking into. I don't think that's the case here, but it's an interesting theory. So looking at this, car company website, Classic Motors of Washington, D.C., they have some really high-end cars, it seems like. They sort of specialize in that type of thing. There was nothing really that popped out from their website that, reeked to me of anything nefarious going on here. But it was interesting to me that they have such a crappy showroom and they have such high-end cars. I mean, I got to wonder how many of these things they're shifting. Another theory that came up was it was over some sort of argument that took place between a worker of Classic Motors and possibly James Edward Gibson that wound up in him being shot or killed in some sort of way. They won't even confirm to us if there was a shot fired or not, so we have no idea what took place here to get all the police to go and a crime scene divisions thing and all that. I mean, there's been no confirmation of anything. But one of the theories is that, maybe someone who worked there had an argument and those might have been the people detained, the 5 people detained. So I just took a look here, who is the staff of Classic Motors. But I didn't see any connection here between any of these people and James Edward Gibson. Nor did I find any outstanding lawsuits or anything like that for these people. So it was just interesting to look at, who might work at this place. Based on that theory that it was a dispute that took place there. And here's the thing, we can't get any answers from the police. The news is not covering any of this, so it's all left to speculation. So I wanted to take a look at Gibson Builders website, which is the building company owned by James Edward Gibson. And this is a really high-end building company. They build homes that I would never be able to afford. And on their website, it says their address is 4800 Washington Avenue Northwest, Suite 101. And that puts it in the basement of Classic Motors. It's the same address as Classic Motors. But when you Google search Gibson Builders, it comes up with another address, a 5185 MacArthur Boulevard Northwest, number 210, I guess that's Suite 210, Washington, which is a completely different address than the one listed on their company website. And because Google goes off of the address listed on Google, the Google Maps address for Gibson Builders DC is this other one. And as you can see, it's not exactly right next to Classic Motors. It's 10 minutes by car in light traffic, because when I did this, it was like really early in the morning. And I'm sure during midday, that's like a 25-minute drive there. And it's just, it's interesting. Now, there's something interesting about the location of Gibson Builders. The one down near the Potomac, you can see the Google address is the one near the Potomac. So this James Edward Gibson guy is known for building giant mansions for people, and it's well known that some of the mansions he's built for DC elites are, some of the big party houses where all these guys go to and stuff like that for private parties and such. So I found it very interesting that in the same building as Gibson Builders LLc, you have this group called the Webster Group. Another interesting thing to note is when I went to the Google Street View of this building that Gibson Builders LLC is supposedly in, and so is the Webster Group, they don't have any signs up. They're clearly on the the second or third floor of that building, probably the second floor being Suite 210. But it's just interesting to note that you don't have any sign for the company. There's no sign on the street when you scroll up and down the street for either company. And you would assume that this is their office where people are going to, meet with them, discuss building designs, and for the Webster Group, go there to discuss different events and planning things, that you would have some sort of sign out front saying, hey, yeah, we're in this building, parking for our group here. Because from this view, all looks like it's in there. It's like a Starbucks and stuff. So I thought that was pretty interesting that they have no advertisements up for their businesses on the outside of the building that they are supposedly in. And my contact on Twitter who sent me all this information to take a look at this sent me this image as well. And this is, just more confirmation that the Webster Group is in the same building as Gibson Builders LLc. I mean, the only way we can even confirm that is from, looking online at the locations, but, there's no images or anything of them in this building that you can see. You'd have to probably go down there and take a screenshot of, the lobby list inside the main lobby or something. I also just thought it'd be interesting to take a look at where these businesses were in comparison to all the other businesses we have going on with all this DC corruption. I don't know if there's any connection between this and like Pizzagate and all that. There could be, I don't know. I'm just looking at, the geographic area and some of the other things that are going on there. You have this Webster Group over here on the left, and that's where one of the building locations is. You can see up in the Friendship Heights up there, that's where Classic Motors is, which is right near Comet Ping Pong. And then you have, Pegasus and Transformer. And then you have the two embassies down there, Embassy of Haiti, Embassy of Ukraine. And then in the middle, where you can see on this, you see the Embassy of Israel right there, which is not far away from Classic Motors DC and Comet Ping Pong. That Embassy of Israel is surrounded by a whole bunch of other embassies. As you can see here, when you zoom in on it, you have the Embassy of the Arab Republic of Egypt, you have the Embassy of Singapore, Embassy of Jordan, Embassy of Ethiopia, Embassy of Bangladesh, Embassy of Malaysia, Embassy of Pakistan. And obviously the Pakistan embassy might have some sort of connection to the Awans, as Imran Mawan was arrested at the border. So I just found it interesting that when you take a look at the bigger picture of the area, what's right in the middle of all these things are all these embassies. And as you can go back and see a couple of videos ago, I did a whole thing on the FAPE, which is the Foundation for Art Preservation of Embassies, which is connected to, the Podestas and all this. So I think they're using the FAPE program as the, method for the child and human trafficking. And it's interesting that all these embassies are right here, right near all these things like Comet Ping Pong and Pegasus and Transformer. Pegasus and Transformer, you literally have to drive through Embassy Row to get the Comet Ping Pong. It's just an interesting coincidence, I would say, as this whole video is just basically a set of interesting coincidences. Just some interesting things I wanted to point out about this James Edward Gibson guy, because some people have a theory that he's, possibly a CIA agent. It's just interesting. I'm not sure about that at all, but it is notable some of the universities that he attended. You have Wesley College, American University, and Georgetown University, which is interesting to me, and that theory that he might be CIA agent, because there are plenty of articles on this. You can go through them online. Just type in American University CIA, and you'll find all types of different things. But, the American University has a long time connection to the CIA, and you can read this article for yourself if you want. David Price, the CIA is welcoming itself back onto American University campuses. And it's all about how they recruit people from American University. You also have this article here about campus recruiting in the CIA, which appeared on the New York Times, which the powers that shouldn't be are trying to say is the arbiter of truth. So if that's true, then the New York Times, which is, their ridiculous arbiter of truth, is saying that, the CIA recruits from these different campuses and colleges and things like that. And a good example of the CIA connection to Georgetown is George Tenet, who was the CIA director up until 2004. And George Tenet was as you can see here, Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in his resume and his education. And he's not the only one, but a recent director of the CIA coming from Georgetown is obviously a good example of their connection to Georgetown. There's plenty more that you could make. Just go look up, different people that worked for the CIA and look how often they've, been connected to Georgetown. You'll find plenty of examples, not just this recent director of the CIA who happened to go to Georgetown. So you can see all this is confirmed in the About Us section on Gibson Builders LLC website, that he did all these things. So even his own building company's website is saying all of that. And it just says, it started the company in 1981, built their first custom house in 92. And if you go look, you can go look through his website yourself. His company has built many, many very, very big homes. You can even see some of these on his website. It doesn't tell you who owns these individual houses, but that would be something interesting to look up. These are just an example of, he has 4 pages of these custom homes that he's built. And look at these things. These are, mansions. I could never afford something like that, especially in some of the areas that he's building these houses. So it's very interesting to me that someone who's obviously well known in the DC community and is building some of the probably most expensive and custom homes in the community dies and not a word of it. And there's, a possible homicide at the car dealership where his building office supposedly in the basement of on the same day he dies, and no one is talking about this in the media at all. No one. And if you click on the publications thing on the Gibson Builders website, it'll pull up a list of publications that have covered his company's work, and it's quite extensive. The media is well aware of James Edward Gibson. They've covered the work his company has done countless times, and there's countless publications about this guy's work. So you would think someone this connected to the media would be covered when he died. I mean, they would definitely report on this, right? Especially if it was a homicide, you would think. And it's interesting to me that his business got all this free publicity. And, when you look at the Comet Ping Pong thing, when you look at Little Baby's Ice Cream, when you look at Voodoo Donuts, all of those businesses got free publicity from the media. If you look at that Pinkygate place that I talked about with From Delusion Truth, they had, diners, drive-ins, and dines in there. So it's just interesting that this guy's business is also another one of these businesses that get all types of free press and put in all these publications. And you can go through all the publications if you want. You can see there's 4 pages of these things, and I'm just showing you a couple of them. I thought this one was interesting. The Washingtonian did a piece on this. And if you go look through the Washingtonian's images of the different persons of interest in the Pizzagate case, the Washingtonian has been at all these different parties where they take pictures of people from, David Brock to James Alefantis to Tamara Lozado to the Podestas. The Washingtonian has pictures all over the place of every one of the persons of interest in the Pizzagate case, and I think they're 100% connected to Pizzagate. And here you have them, connected to this guy. They covered his business. They did a piece on this, building company of this guy who built mansions for DC elites that just mysteriously died. And somehow not a word from any one of these publications that covered this guy's business in the past, not a word out of the local DC, Fox station, nothing. Not a word out of any media, independent or, corporate media. No one has covered the story in depth at all. When you look at his Contact Us page, it still shows the contact location as being at the same address as the car dealership, where the very strange looking possible homicide took place the same day that this guy died. Okay? Now, interestingly, just to take a look at this Webster group, which happens to share a building with Gibson Builders LLC, and other than that, I found no direct connection. It's just, another one of these coincidences in this case. However, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at this Webster group. When you pull up their homepage, the first thing that pops right out at me is the image of the Bushes and the Clintons. And when you go through the types of events that this company puts on, it's for that level of DC elites. People like, Bill and Hillary Clinton and George W. Bush. That's the type of level that these people are involved in a building with no advertisements out front, and what they do is put on events for these people. Interesting, when I clicked on their portfolio, they had almost no images up of their events they throw. And yes, I was half expecting to see spirit cooking events and things like that on there, but they basically have no images up of any events that they throw, which is very weird for an event planning company. that's involved with this level of elites, I would say. When you go who we are, you pull up this. One of the top event planning companies, the Webster Group is a woman-owned global event planning, production, and fundraising agency providing award-winning and innovative and cost-effective solutions to corporate, nonprofit, and government clients. Our portfolio includes over 600 events, with no images, attended by U.S. President and First Ladies, foreign heads of state and ambassadors, government and political figures, military leaders, entertainers, and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. These events, ranging in size from 10 to 43,000 attendees, include dedication and commissioning ceremonies, galas, concert, multi-day conferences, and conventions, as well as meetings for global advisors and international delegations, which, all of this sounds like stuff that is involved with embassies and things like that, which might tie into the FAPE group, which is the Foundation for Art Preservation of Embassies, right? And it's very interesting to me that when you actually do click on that portfolio link, this 600 events they talk about in their portfolio has none. There's 3 images in there, and they're tiny. You can barely even see them. It's not even worth putting in this film. So the CEO, the chairman, Linda C. Webster, is one of the most sought-after event development and relationship strategists in Washington, D.C. She has an incomparable ability to coach and connect clients with thought leaders and decision makers at the highest levels of business and government. Her ability to create strategic partnerships between nonprofit and for-profit organizations comes from her wide-ranging experience as a business and community leader. For more than 20 years, Ms. Webster has played a key role in major projects in Washington, D.C. area and beyond. Her first extraordinary opportunity came in '84 when she was given the role of opening director for sales for the historic Willard Intercontinental Hotel. She was later promoted to director of marketing and eventually moved on to marketing and sales roles with the Watergate and Four Seasons Boston hotels. Following her marriage to former FBI director and then CIA director William Webster, Linda retired from the hotel business and turned her sights to service, assuming leadership roles in a number of key philanthropic organizations such as the National Symphony, Friends of the U.S. Arboretum, the Salvation Army, and many more. She soon developed a professional model for fundraising events, one that would assume a serious strategic business approach to include volunteer development and budget management. Ms. Webster's reputation as a responsible fundraising volunteer changed to professional event planner when the International Relief and Development Organization, Save the Children, engaged her to coordinate a fundraising event honoring a retiring chairman. The highly successful dinner launched the organization's now famous Halaby Murphy Disaster Fund, and soon thereafter, Ms. Webster became Save the Children's Director of Development for the Mid-Atlantic region. In that role, she now worked on new donor development programs. Launched an embassy luncheon fundraising event, masterminded 2 Ringling Brothers circuses, and collaborated with the Mosaic Foundation on a major event that resulted in the largest private gift ever given to Save the Children's Middle East programs. Then September 11th changed the country. The Websters lost a treasured friend in a plane that crashed into the Pentagon. Months later, a board founded and run by dedicated victims' families was seeking fundraising counsel for planned Pentagon memorial to honor those who had been tragically perished. The Webster Group was hired and embarked on a 4-year journey that would result in raising over $22 million for the dedication of the Pentagon Memorial by President Bush on September 11, 2008, at a ceremony attended by victims' families. The Vice President, Cabinet Secretaries, both houses of Congress, the diplomatic corps, and multitudes of press, TWG played an integral role in all aspects of fundraising and produced special events leading up to the dedication, winning industry awards for Memorial Pre-Dedication Dinner. Miss Webster's influence in the design of compelling events was never more present than the Air Force Memorial Dedication Weekend of activities. On Dedication Day, over 40,000 were in attendance, both on-site and in the Pentagon's South parking lot, where a special Air Force exhibition and full-scale country music concert was staged. Historic flyovers, a moving video, original music composed by the Air Force Band expressly for the dedication, Presidential participation and much more combined to make the day arguably one of the most impressive ever in a region usually unimpressed by ceremony. Another of Miss Webster's signature projects include a Washington weekend to benefit George Washington's Mount Vernon estate, which included a reproduction gala dinner at the estate of only state dinner ever staged outside of White House by President Kennedy, a lecture by beloved historian David McCullough at Statuary Hall, dinner at the Library of Congress, and a major donor brunch. Recent client organizations Miss Webster has served include American Red Cross, Congressional Medal of Honor Society, Garda World, Common Sense Media, Trust for the National Mall, the John Marshall Memorial Park Foundation, Points of Light Foundation, the Monuments Men Foundation for Preservation of Art, U.S. Department of Transportation, and U.S. Aid. Two of those are well-known covers for the CIA, that being American Red Cross and U.S. Aid. And the Monuments Men Foundation for the Preservation of Art sounds extremely familiar to FAPE, which is connected to the whole Pizzagate thing, which is the Foundation of Art Preservation for Embassies. It's very similar to the Monuments Men Foundation. Miss Webster is Chairman Emeritus of American Forest, the nation's oldest environmental organization. She's also a two-term member of the Stevens College Board of Trustees and has been recently appointed to the Board of Fellows at Thunderbird School of Global Management. She recently completed her role as regional co-chair for the first Mayo Clinic Capital campaign. So she's a connection to the Mayo Clinic. And all of you looking into all this stuff, note their connection to all of this as well. An effort chaired by J.W. Marriott, Jr. that exceeded a $1.25 billion goal. Miss Webster holds 2 advanced degrees, including a master's in business from Southern Methodist University and a master's in international management from the Thunderbird School of Global Management. She graduated with honors from Stevens College with a BA in history and foreign languages. And I'll have you note that foreign languages is something that the CIA always looks for in operatives. While earning certificates of study in Spain from the universities of Salamanca, Granada, and Madrid, Miss Webster has lived in Europe and has traveled extensively worldwide for both business and pleasure. She speaks Spanish and has a working knowledge of French. She and Judge Webster live with a border collie, golden retriever, and tabby cat in Washington, D.C. So it's interesting to note all of the major connections this lady has to organizations that are directly tied to stuff like the CIA. And all of the people they throw parties for, all the biggest names in DC, the amount of connections here are just ridiculous. I would highly suggest people go look into this Webster group, even if just to look into them on their own. There's obviously something about this place that is not what it seems. And I'll just note again that the only connection I have between this group and James Edward Gibson is the location of his office is right next to the location of this office, and they're both involved with throwing parties for DC elites. One builds the mansions, the other one throws the parties. Another interesting theory that was brought up is the fact that David A. Kessler and James Edward Gibson were in a court case against one another, and they were about to file for discovery against one another right before all of this took place. So you can see this case started on 2/21/2017. So coming up on 8/17/2017, there was supposed to be a motion for a protective order placed, which I believe is to protect the Edward Gibson guy from the plaintiff, or the other way around. I'm not sure which one it was. It doesn't say on here. However, I believe that's what it was for. And also, all written discovery was supposed to be served by the end of September. And this James Edward Gibson guy ends up dead at the end of July, heading into almost August. So the timing is fairly strange on the death of James Edward Gibson, who's involved in this court case with David A. Kessler. So the final theory that I have is that this David A. Kessler guy had James Edward Gibson killed, but there could also be plenty of other theories here. I just wanted to note all of this extremely strange activity and this very strange death of James Edward Gibson, and hopefully people can find more information. But here you can see David A. Kessler was appointed the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration in December 1990 by President George Bush. David A. Kessler, born in 1951, was reappointed by President Bill Clinton in 93. He stepped down in 97 to become Dean of the Yale University School of Medicine. He'll be remembered as a consumer's advocate and a vigilant watchdog over the industries which produce food and drugs. And, with the connection to Yale, you have the skull and bone connections there. You have the Bill Clinton connection right in there, and the Bush connection. And this David A. Kessler guy just so happens to be in a lawsuit with James Edward Gibson when James Edward Gibson mysteriously dies what looks like in the basement of Classic Motors DC, a car place. And with the connections of the Clintons, the Wasserman Schultzes, and the Awans and car dealerships, I just thought it was all very strange world we live in. So that's what I got for you today. Now, my conclusion to all this is I have no idea what's actually taking place here, what actually happened to James Edward Gibson, who was responsible for his murder, if there's any connection to any of these bigger picture type things or not. That is up for all of us to decide on our own and to start investigating. I just wanted to bring to light what I had found thus far and what people had sent to me and asked me to cover because of how strange this situation is, the lack of media coverage, the lying about this whole situation by the DC police, and just the DC police corruption that we just keep running into. And this is just another case where we can't get any answers. We don't know what happened to this guy. This guy's connected to all the biggest elites in DC because he built homes for all these people, and he just dies mysteriously and we get no answers. And on the same day at the business location of his, there's what looks like homicide that the DC police is not reporting to anyone. So what we're doing here is putting out information, and now I'm asking you, the audience, to go forward and do your own research and submit to me anything you can find. Let's go and take these leads I've given you and try to do an investigation into this to figure out what actually happened to James Edward Gibson. And speaking of what happened, I got an advanced copy of the book What Happened by Hillary Clinton. It was much shorter than I thought it was going to be, considering she probably hired a bunch of ghostwriters to write it. But I can read you the entire book right now. So this is an audio book of What Happened by Hillary Clinton. Chapter 1, Anyone Who Spoke Against Me. We came, we saw, they died. Summary, at this point, what difference does it make? The end. This is Titus Frost, spitting truth, causing glitches in the Matrix.